All right. So, um, as I said, my name is Mackenzie Thomas, and I'm the program coordinator here with Texas Agribility. I want to just start a little intro about myself, and I'm probably turn my camera off because I do live in a rural area, and my internet has already been a little spotty today. So, but I did want you to see that I'm a real person. And so I grew up in a rural area in East Texas. I currently live there now and work remotely, but I acquired a disability when I was in a car accident when I was 18. And so I was a wheelchair user for about 5 years during that time. And it just gave me a little bit of a different perspective on what it means to, do what you want to do and need to do while having a disability. So that's kind of what brought me to Agribility. I was a student at Texas A&M, where Agribility is kind of housed out of, and got connected with a project while I was in college and interned there, helping with some events and things. And after I graduated from Texas A&M, I took a full-time position and have been here for I think 6 years now. So I have some personal ties to what I do and why I think it's important. Also, we do have cattle and do hay here in East Texas. So this is an industry that I'm currently involved in and will continue to be involved in. So it's something that's very important to me. I'm not just somebody, who thinks it's important but doesn't live that every day. So that's just a little bit about myself. And I do have, I'm going to turn my camera off just so I don't have use my bandwidth, but feel free to ask any questions. You are able to also unmute your microphone if you have a question or want to ask something verbally. But we're going to go ahead and get right into it. So this webinar series was kind of developed geared towards service providers, and I recognize several of the names that are on here today as being vocational rehab counselors or a service provider for individuals with disabilities. And so you may be kind of wondering what assistance is available for farmers and ranchers. Really quickly, I just want to kind of give you an outline of what we're going to discuss today. So I'm going to touch a little bit on just what our project is, and what services that we provide for individuals with disabilities in agriculture. Just a couple of examples of assistive technology for farmers and ranchers, and what that might look like differently from maybe what you're used to when you think of assistive technology. I'll also quickly just touch on our relationship and partnership with vocational rehabilitation and what that looks like. And then we'll actually get into a couple of examples of cases that we've worked with direct service providers like vocational rehab to get individuals some assistive technology that allows them to be successful on their farm or ranch after acquiring a disability. So we are funded by the National Institute of Food and Agriculture at the USDA. It is a grant funded project. I think there's currently 20 or 21 funded projects throughout the nation. And we are one of those and are here in Texas. There are other there are other projects funded throughout the nation. And so if you are not in Texas or have contacts outside of the state, there is a good chance that there may be a project that serves your area. If there is not a project that serves that state, then the National Agribility Project helps cover the states that are not covered by their own state project. I'm going to quickly do a little poll just to get some interaction. You can also unmute your mic if you have any questions. But I would like to just kind of gauge some feedback and see where you're coming from as we get into today's webinar. So I'm going to go ahead and launch this. You should see it come up on your screen. And the question is, in what capacity do you interact with farmers and ranchers? So maybe it is that you are a farmer rancher, maybe you um, interact with them through your office. Maybe you have not, served farmers and ranchers with disabilities in the past, but if you could just kind of record that response, I'll give you a few seconds to do that, and then we'll look and see kind of where you're coming from. So I see some coming in now. I'll give you a few more minutes to kind of think about that. All right. So looking at the results, it looks like there's some of you that are vocational rehab providers. Some of you maybe are individuals with disabilities, that you're interested in serving farmers and ranchers, and also some that are in rural areas. Also see something that uh, you're an assistive technology specialist. So we will kind of touch on some of the assistive technology. We're planning to have some additional webinar topics that goes more in detail about assistive technology in the future, but we will touch on that a little bit today. So I appreciate your participation in the poll, and just so we know kind of where you're coming from. So we also have a couple of partners with our current funded project. Like I said, Agribility is a nationwide project, and so they're one of our big partners. But we're also partner with BVSIL, which is Brazos Valley Center for Independent Living, and they are out of Brazos County and serve individuals with disabilities directly. And then we also are um, partnered with AgriSafe Network, who is a service provider for education and resources for farmers and ranchers with disabilities. They have lots of webinars and educational topics. They also do a lot with mental health. And so there's currently some really important and really neat projects that they're doing and rolling out related to mental health for farmers and ranchers. So that's really exciting for us, and we'll get more in depth probably on what that looks like today too. So what we do is provide services to individuals with disabilities, chronic health conditions, and functional limitations in agriculture. So I'm going to do, yeah, we'll go ahead and do another poll. So I'm going to have another poll question. I'll give you a couple of minutes to, um, actually, I think there's a slide for it. I'll leave. So the average age of the Texas farmer rancher is currently 59, according to TDA, the Texas Department of Ag. So from what we know about aging, you have an increased risk of, secondary injury or disability with just age-related illnesses and disabilities. And with the average age being 59, we know that, of course, for every, 25-year-old farmer rancher, that also includes people up into their 80s and 90s. I know my grandfather who, had his ag operation here in East Texas, he didn't quit, being like the primary farmer person until he was 85. And so that's not uncommon. Whereas if you're looking at people from other work industries, where average retirement age is, 65-ish. And so, these individuals are not retiring until much, much later in life, which causes, the need for more education and services for individuals that have maybe age-related or chronic health conditions. Um, so I'm going to do another poll question really quickly. You should see that pop up on your screen. It says, what do you think are the most common disabilities that we see in agriculture? So just put your thoughts there, and I'll give you a couple minutes to do that. Let's see, some says physical disabilities, loss of limb, leg injuries, orthopedic injuries or impairments, a lot of physical, heart conditions, diabetes. Thank you guys for responses on that. A lot of the most common one, 4 people said physical, and that is pretty true. We'll get into more of the details on that, but some of the most common disabilities that we see are arthritis. Most of our clientele deal with some sort of arthritis, a lot of joint injuries, orthopedic type injuries, back injury, knee injuries, neck injuries. Um, but we also have some, chronic health condition type injuries that we see. We've got some diabetes, hypertension type things, but also um, something that is maybe a little bit unique about our program is that we have a lot of programs geared toward military veterans. And so we see a lot of our clientele are, I think, 70% or so on average are military veterans. And so a lot of them, have service connected disabilities, which may look a little bit different than what we were used to seeing when we're just serving the farmer rancher population. Most of them are beginning farmer ranchers and, have come out of the military, but have acquired a disability while doing their military service. So that might look like a traumatic brain injury or PTSD or things like that. So the needs of someone who has, say, PTSD might look a lot different from someone who has a back injury. But I don't want it to get lost that individuals that have maybe mental health conditions are at any less need of, services than somebody that has a physical disability. So, with that in mind, looking at what we provide here at Texas Agribility. So, one of the major things we do is when an individual becomes a client, we provide just one on one consultation with them. We normally do this monthly through phone calls, emails, but we can also provide some one-on-one consultation with service providers as well. I know some of you have clients who are clients of ours at Agribility and may have questions about, how do you serve someone, that has a disability and is a farmer rancher? What could be possible? Do they need a business plan? How do you, purchase equipment for them? Where do you source that equipment? And so really, our project, we don't have funding for to purchase equipment ourselves, so that's why we utilize some of the direct service providers like vocational rehab. But it funds our salary to be able to be here, and we can talk to you and discuss and look at things as much as you need. And we're kind of here to be of assistance to the farmers and rangers, but also to the service providers as well. But we spend a lot of our time doing this one-on-one consultation where we're looking at what the farmer rancher's needs are, how we can address those, what other resources and referrals we might need to be able to do that. And so that's a big piece of what we do, along with doing some of those referrals and connecting them to other resources. We refer to vocational rehab a lot of the time for individuals with disabilities, but also just to other service providers like the USDA offices, extension offices. They're to get some agriculture education. We also connect them to some of our other programs that do direct education for beginning farmers and ranchers. And then something we're trying to do a better job of is connecting them also to each other. So, um, when you're looking at a rural population, the connection that they have to interact with other individuals, especially those that also have disabilities or health conditions, might be a little slim. And we know that, based on the research, that people do better when they have a community of people that kind of understand what they're going through. So, because of that, we have kind of implemented a peer group that will be launching at the beginning of the year and doing quarterly listening sessions with our staff, that they can kind of chime in and just discuss what issues they might be facing or sharing things that are important to them. But we'll start that peer group here soon and help better connect individuals that are agribility clients or just farmers and ranchers and kind of needing that connection with each other. So that's something we're kind of excited about in the future. Um, we also provide recommendations for assistive technology, task modification, and secondary injury prevention. So we do that through kind of on-site farm and ranch assessments, and we can go out to a person's property and look at what they're doing, how they're doing it, what assistive equipment might be available that could help them do that either easier, safer. And our goal is always to keep them in agriculture if that's something they want to do, as long as they can do it safely. We're not, trying to. It's a dangerous occupation, and we realize that. But this is a way of life for most farmers and ranchers. It's not something that's just a job to them. They find a lot of identity in the culture of being in agriculture. And so to tell someone, well, it's not really the safest occupation, you should probably find something else to do, is not really very effective. And most of the time, even if we say, like, oh, you should, find something a little safer to do, they likely won't, give that occupation up. They may continue to do that and just not do it very safely. So if we can help them um, do some of those things a little more safely, that's always a better option. So this is we'll get into some examples, but this is looking at just a piece of equipment that was recommended to help a farmer who was, planting a lot of stuff by hand. So a lot of what we do is making these recommendations for the way either they're doing their tasks to make them more um, easier on their body, more safe, something like that, or providing recommendations for equipment and assistive technology to help them either be able to do that job or do it without, getting a secondary injury in the future. So, this is an example of a tractor lift and just an example of what assistive technology may look like on a farm or ranch that you may not have seen before or may not be used to seeing. This individual had a spinal cord injury, so he was not able to get on and off of his tractor. And for someone um, who's not familiar with what assistive devices might be available, you may say, well, that wouldn't be possible to drive a tractor after a spinal cord injury, but they do have tractor lifts. As you can see, he transferred from his wheelchair, his manual wheelchair, into the seat of this lift. It lifts him up. He's able to control it remotely and get into his tractor independently. And so when he can do that, he can then, do a lot of the tasks on his operation safely, um, on his own without needing as much help as, if he was not able to get into his tractor. He also, I don't know if you could tell, but at the beginning of the video, they there's hand controls here on all of his foot pedals, so he's able to operate that with hand controls independently. And like I said, we provide some direct services where we actually go out and directly, provide services through those farm and ranch assessments, where we go out to the property, look at what their tasks are, look at, what their abilities are, what their goals are, what resources they have to help them, and then make those recommendations. It is a contract that we have with vocational rehab, and we'll get into that a little bit in a second. But we can also provide some business planning assistance for individuals with disabilities, especially with some cognitive impairments or mental illnesses, PTSD, things like that, traumatic brain injury. There may be some barriers to getting a good business plan together, and that should never keep someone from being successful on their operation. So we also provide some business planning assistance for individuals with disabilities. We can do that in a couple of different ways, but we also have a contract with vocational rehab to be able to provide that service too. So if you see a farmer rancher who's maybe having to redo or rethink what they're doing to accommodate their disability, or they've acquired a disability and they want to produce income from their farm or ranch to help supplement either Social Security income or just make themselves some sort of income. But they haven't been able to really put that on paper. That is something that we can help with too. We have a pretty robust business planning education program that runs, 2 or 3 times a year, and we're constantly expanding that they can get plugged into. Or we can also provide some of that one-on-one consultation to help them get that plan together. So that shouldn't be a barrier for somebody getting into agriculture or wanting to, kind of show that they can make an income from farming and ranching. So just quickly touch on our contract with vocational rehabilitation. Some of you on may be somewhat familiar with it because we've utilized it for clients of yours, but basically we have a contract at the state level where we can do those farm and ranch assessments. We go out to the property, take pictures. We have an occupational therapist and an ag engineer that comes out with us on those, as well as a disability specialist. And so when we're looking at the person's tasks and what they are interested in, we're not just getting one person's perspective on that. We have a whole team of people that come. We look at the safety of that, what that looks like from an occupational therapy standpoint, the risk for injuries and secondary injuries. So all that's taken into consideration, and then we put that together in a nice little report, along with any recommendations we have for that individual. So when you kind of access that farm and ranch assessment contract, that's what you're getting, is a really well-rounded assessment and report, and justifying what the needs are of that person, what any task modification or recommendation would, how I would address that need, how that ties to their employment in agriculture, any additional needs they might have. Like we've had clients who, when we went to their assessment, maybe they were having issues getting in and out of their bathroom. And while that's not something that we typically do as part of our farm and ranch assessment, we realize that if you can't get into your home and get in and around your home and into and out of your bathroom or your shower, that's something that's going to really affect your success. And so we can, refer to other, back to VR or other agencies to make sure that, those assessments are done, driving assessments and evaluations, things like that, that maybe we don't always do the assessment for, but we can also kind of put that into our recommendation report if that's something we feel like the client would benefit from. Um, we've also helped with, through this contract, with some, of course, the business planning assistance, and then helping justify self-employment in agriculture. So we have had clients before that you know, there's a slew of paperwork I know that's involved with doing a self-employment plan, and if the individual's struggling with filling out some of the paperwork or getting that information together, that's something that we've helped them do and think through what it looks like to be self-employed versus a hobby farm situation, how they justify that. So that's also something we can kind of assist with if needed. I want to take a second, since I know a lot of you guys are on from Voc Rehab, and just open it up for any questions if you guys have any questions. You can use the chat box too, or the Q&A option, if you want to ask a question that way. Another couple seconds, but anyway, or you can unmute your mic and just verbally ask any questions you might have. All right, well, I don't hear anyone, but I will keep going, and then we'll have some time at the end too, where we can do some discussion and ask questions too. So, we don't just serve the farmer or rancher, if they are the, primary owner operator. We also, I kind of touched on beginning farmers and ranchers or individuals who are wanting to get started and maybe haven't done this in the past, or maybe have worked for somebody or grew up doing it but haven't had their own operation. We also serve farm workers and employees of farms and ranches. So not just people that are the owner operator, but people that work there, their family members. And also, one of our focuses for this new grant is women in agriculture. So um, most of our staff, uh, actually all technically, but I think some of our contract helpers are women, and most of them are farmers and ranchers themselves. So this is something that's, not just needed in the industry, but something that we're very tied to. So um, serving that population is very important to us as well. So this is a kind of the more interesting part, is just doing some case examples so you can see what this might look like in practice. These obviously are just very specific cases that address very specific needs of somebody that has a very, specific disability. So this is not all encompassing by any means, but just, kind of used to show you an example of what might be possible for some of our clients, and especially shared clients with Voc Rehab. So here's one example. This individual has 7 acres in Central Texas. They did vegetable production, had their military veteran that had a degenerative disc disease, PTSD, TBI, and some knee and back injuries. So some of their major barriers were planting and harvesting, being able to ride the tractor for extended periods of time, connecting their implements, laying irrigation lines, things like that. So I'll kind of show you what we did for this individual. So, like I said, being able to connect and disconnect implements with their back and neck injuries, it was really difficult riding the tractor for long periods of time, being able to turn around for most of that, looking behind him to see what he's plowing, where he's going, what's going on behind him. So a kind of simple, um, modification that we recommended was rear view cameras. I'll see if it'll show this video. As you can see, it switches from front to rear view. So he can not only see what's behind him, but he can switch the view to what's in front of him if needed. You can mount, I think, up to 3 cameras at different areas on the tractor, like if you needed a side view or 2 rear views. Um, that's an option. These were also funded, these recommendations were funded through vocational rehab. So this is something that was approved and funded through VR. Also, for his tractor, he didn't have a canopy on it whenever we went to visit him the first time. And so being able to be out in the hot Texas sun and, just the secondary injury risks of like being exposed to the elements all the time and his stamina, we recommended a canopy for that tractor as well as this is a plastic mulch layer. So he was currently, I don't know if you can see this big, like tarp stuff. He was rolling that out by hand, bent over on his rows and laying irrigation line by hand. And so whenever he had a plant that was really, taxing task for him, um, and he's like, yeah, I could do it for a few hours, and then I'd have to like go rest and maybe be sore for the next 2 or 3 days, and I'd have to get back to it later. So that was a real barrier for him. Where this one implement, if you can kind of see as we look at it, it lays that plastic mulch as well as the irrigation lines. So you can kind of pause it. So the plastic mulch kind of goes through here and it lays it down and makes the row kind of fold over the plastic mulch so that he doesn't really have to do anything beyond that, but also um, this little wheel up here holds his irrigation line and lays it at the same time. So he's literally able to just drive down the row and do all of that in at one time, which allowed him to plant. I think whenever we first visited him, he might have had 1 acre planted, and then we went back for his second visit. He had most of the entire 7 acres. He was able to plant because he could just manage that much more uh, planting and harvesting with those implements, which also led to more income for him and just a better, employment outcome being self-employed. This is just to show you kind of what his tractor setup looked like with the cameras. We also recommended a better seat for him and extended steps on that tractor as well. There were some other just standing planters and transplanters. So there's certain seeds and transplants that can't very easily be planted with his tractor. So then he was doing all of that by hand. So we recommended some of these planting aids. This is one for seeds, and then you'll see one for plants that are already, individual plants that you have to transplant into the soil. So for these, you stab this, the end of this into the soil and you release the seed and it goes down into the soil, but you never have to bend over. So he can do all this standing up, which allows him to not, make his back injuries worse. And so he uses those a lot for things that he wasn't able to plant using his tractor, and said that was very helpful for him. This always also is another planter that kind of roll across the ground and it plants as you go. You can set it for different widths and seed types, but he's not having to bend over and do all of that by hand. He just walks down the row. So here's another example of another case that's very different from that first one. Um, in that agriculture looks very different depending on where you're at in the state, what the individual's doing, and then also considering what their disability is. So um by the way, I just want to touch that those recommendations on that previous case, there were several more that were involved with this. We had some, automatic watering situations that were recommended, as well as like an iPad and or some sort of in technology to help him keep up with his tasks. With him having PTSD, keeping up with tasks and lists and what he was supposed to be doing for that day could be kind of complicated and difficult. And so he had some really good support at home to help him with that if needed, but just keeping up with records of what he was planting and when he was supposed to plant. So we also recommended that he get an iPad or computer to help him kind of keep up with that and setting reminders for when he needed to do different tasks so that he kind of stay on top of that. because one thing that um, is not always super well known is that farmers and ranchers, they're not only the ones out there planting and harvesting their crops or taking care of their animals. Most of the time, they're also bookkeepers and mechanics and all the other things that it takes to keep that operation running. With them being self employed, most of the time it's just an individual and maybe their family that's running that operation. And so, if you think of a small business, everything that a small business would need, that person is having to do a lot of that themselves. And I saw someone in the chat put the jack of all trades, and that's very, very true. They have to, be able to work on equipment. They have to be able to keep records and keep books for things. So if they're having, you can't just look at what their agriculture tasks are, but also, what they have to do as far as office work goes, or, in their shop. And is that accessible when they're having to work on equipment? And also looking at the seasonality of agriculture, like in the summer your tasks look very different than they do in the winter or during harvest season and things like that. So we try to keep all of that in mind as we're doing those assessments. Is not just what do your tasks look like today, but what do they look like, when you're planting or harvesting, or it's in the winter and you're trying to, keep your water lines from freezing. So that's just something to kind of keep in mind as you're working with farmers and ranchers, is their tasks look very different, and they kind of have to be a jack of all trades. So this example, this individual has over 11,000 acres in the Panhandle. They have cattle, and they have T5 paralysis. So a lot of their barriers had to do with mobility around their operation, checking their cows, feeding and watering, being able to work their cattle, connecting feeders and trailers and stuff to their truck, and then those types of things. So, this is just one example of something that was recommended, is just a cattle chute that that individual could operate. They did have a track wheelchair, so they could, get outside their home and close to their home, or where they could transport that all-terrain wheelchair, you know, pretty closely. But there was a lot of parts of their farm ranch that were still not very accessible, with it being, almost 12,000 acres. You can imagine that that's a lot of land, and you can't, just hop on over to the next place very easily. So mobility was a big concern, and also just the quantity of cattle and land that they had. So this is their existing cattle chute. Everything is run by hand and with levers. And so for somebody with that type of disability, this may be something that may not be possible for them to operate themselves. They did have some support at home to be able to do that, but they wanted to be independent, and that is something that they could do, if that was accessible to them, is work the chute as they're working the animals. So this is just an example of a piece of assistive technology that could really eliminate that barrier for them. This is all hydraulic, so you can't really tell very well from this picture, but it has little levers that are really no more difficult to push than like a blinker on a car would be, where it would, close all of these gates and squeezes and head gates, and all the parts on the chute that you would need to work can be worked from these levers here. And this arm swings around so that if the individual is seated, or maybe can only get access to the chute or the working pins at one area, that arm can kind of swing to where that's most accessible for them, and they can operate that themselves. You have to take into consideration the safety of that, and making sure, whenever that he's at a place that's safe for him to operate that, and gives him some protection from those animals. But with that piece of equipment, he is then able to, help with working all of the livestock, and that, leads for more productivity on his ranch as a whole. So, some other things, but I don't have pictures of all of it, but we recommended for him. He did have a vehicle that had hand controls on it. He also had a tracked wheelchair. So a lot of what we recommended were things to help him with the working of the kettles, opening, closing gates. We recommend a lot of gate openers and bump gates. Because individuals that, even if they are able to get in and out of their vehicle, just the strain of having to like open and close 10 gates to do something, can really wear on your joints over time. And so we recommend a lot of automatic gate openers and bump gates so that they're not having to get out of their vehicle or tractor or whatever it is and open and close those gates all the time. We also recommended bulk feeders. He already had one, so we were just recommending that there be a powered jack on that, so he wasn't trying to um, connect and disconnect that by himself because it's really heavy. So, things that kind of eliminate or reduce their need for, physical demands that they may already have some struggles with because of their disability is what, we try to recommend. There are tons of options for what assistive technology, there might be available for farmers and ranchers and based on their tasks. There's this entire website that kind of goes through different tasks and needs and looks, gives options for DIY a lot of times, options for that, as well as things that can just be purchased. And it has little descriptions for each of those. So if you're interested in, what might be available, and if there's, products that could address certain needs, this Agribility Toolbox is a great way to find a lot of those. You can just Google Agribility Toolbox, or the link is here, agribility.org/toolbox. So how do you access Agribility services? Maybe you know someone that would benefit from services. Maybe you just want to keep this in your kind of toolkit for in the future. If you run across someone who's in agriculture interested, so you can either refer them to us. We have a referral form that's shared from vocational rehab or other disability service providers that, kind of lines out. It basically just has their contact information of the client and then a little bit of your information as a person referring, so that we can kind of all stay in the loop in what's going on with that person and their case. We do have releases of information if that's needed for us to be able to, discuss the person's case with maybe their caseworker or social worker or anything like that. But also the clients can do a self-referral. They can just call our office, or any of our staff, or you can find the forms to become a client from our website. And I can, after the webinar, I can send that link to some of those forms in an email follow up from the webinar today. But um, that is an option for them to always just contact us themselves. We try to keep everyone that's kind of involved with their case, what they're working with Voc Rehab, and in the loop on what's going on. So a lot of times we do get those information releases so we can, talk to VR counselors and help them through that process as well, of, doing a farm range assessment or just doing some consultation to see, what their needs might be. And that's always, free to use anytime. They also don't have to provide us any medical documentation. So it's just kind of self-report on what they're struggling with. So if, they say, well, I don't have my, my doctor's note saying, whatever my disability is, for them to be a client of Texas Agribility, they just have to just fill out some information about themselves and what they're struggling with. And then we, from that point, schedule a call with them and go through everything and kind of make a plan for if there's any referrals we need to do for direct services or ordering of assessments. and kind of make a plan from there. We also like to keep in contact with them on a monthly basis, especially when their case is active, um, so that we're just kind of in the loop on, what's going on, if there's any needs that they have, that we try to, keep in pretty close contact with them throughout that process, make sure everything's progressing well, and we can help any way we need to. So with that, I'll kind of open it up again for any questions. You can ask them in the chat, Q&A, or you can just unmute your microphone. And also see, I know we have some on that have worked with us before. If you have any comments about what that process was like to share with others, I think that would be really helpful too. All right, well, I don't hear any questions. Or and feel free to unmute yourself or ask those in the chat or the Q&A if you think of something. We do have a survey. I'll probably just send it out after the webinar ends, because I know some people had to jump off a little early. But it's really helpful, um, for us to gauge whether this is helpful and what we can do to improve, but also, just to see what works and what we could do better for the future. So if you have a couple minutes, it's maybe 10 questions on, this webinar and if it was beneficial or not, and the different topics. If you could just take a minute to fill that out, when we send that survey link at the end, that would be very helpful to us. So I did see in the chat, as needs for specialized equipment are being identified, are manufacturers looking at this and developing more products that would be helpful to this population? And that's from Cynthia. I would say so. I talked to um, a company that manufactures a quick hitching system. So, like for your tractor, if you hitching and or connecting and disconnecting tractor implements is a real barrier for a lot of people. There's a lot of connecting points you have to get lined up just right. And so for somebody that has a disability, variety of different disabilities and reasons, that can be a really big barrier for people. And so um, there's 3-point connections as well as a PTO connection, and sometimes implements have both or one or the other. So that can be a real struggle. So there's a company called Jiffy Hitch that had manufactured a hitching system. I'll see if I can pull up an example of that really quickly. Show you what that looks like, to give you kind of a visual. So this is kind of what that looks like. So as you can see, this is a tractor. Typically, you would have these arms that you have to get lined up perfectly with the points on this. This is a mower, it looks like. And so it can be really hard to maneuver all of this stuff and be getting on and off the tractor to make sure it hooks up right. So they manufactured a hitching system. Let's see if I can find the original one to show you an example. So, it kind of, so here's the part that connects to the tractor, and then here's a part that connects to the implement. And you just back up and it clicks into this part on the implement, and you don't have to get off the tractor to do that. and they tested for safety and had all of that made. Well, there's several implements that um, it didn't address the need for whenever a PTO has to be connected, which is like what is on this mower. You can see this part here. These splines have to be connected just right for it to work. And so that was still a big barrier for people who were connecting and disconnecting implements. So based on feedback they got from Agribility, they figured out a way to connect the PTO to this hitching system. And now they offer, since I think 2018, she said, they started manufacturing these with the PTO connection. They also started making them that they can have a stand for them so that when you take this off, it's kind of standing up on its own and you can connect and disconnect without having to maneuver anything around. And so there are, um, as technology gets better and time goes on and feedback is given, a lot of the manufacturers are making things a little bit more universally designed, or addressing some of the needs, that we've seen in the past. So that's been really helpful. Thank you for your question. Is there any other questions?
Mackenzie.
Yes.
Okay, I have a quick question.
Sure.
Okay, so the Texas Panhandle
Hmm.
customer is mine,
Right.
and we're still in a predicament of not having anyone to install the gate openers. And so, do y'all run into that problem a lot
It
in like the
can
more rural
be, yes.
communities?
So and really it's mostly that type of thing, like gates and smaller jobs, is finding vendors. It's a lot easier, and I'm glad you brought that up, to kind of just purchase equipment and find vendors for equipment than it is to find vendors to do installs. A lot of this stuff that not a lot, but we do frequently recommend things that may need to be manufactured. Um, like say there's not some extended steps are this way, hand controls, they can be built by somebody like at a welding shop pretty inexpensively, but the process for VR, finding a vendor that meets all the requirements and is set up in the system, and is willing to go through that process for something that may not cost a whole lot can be challenging. So sometimes what we do is, like for hand controls and that type of thing, if that's something the client is willing to kind of take responsibility of, that it's not a huge cost, and we kind of put that into their assessment write up, which also shows like this is their part, what they're going to be contributing. In the case of the gate openers, there's a couple of different ways we've done it. We've tried to find, you know, companies that install gates. With it being really rural, that's a lot harder to do than somebody, say, like in the Dallas area, which has happened before. Um, you know, there's probably a lot of companies that do gate installations in Dallas where, it may not be the case in the middle of, the Texas Panhandle. So we try to find, fencing or gate installers, but what we've been able to do before, and I don't know how necessarily this looks on the internal side, is, we've had clients who were on family, farms or ranches, and they had somebody that they felt like could install the gate opener themselves. They come with instructions and, ways for self install. It just may not be possible for the individual with a disability to do that by themselves. But sometimes VR has been able to do what they call one time, I think they call it a maintenance payment, where they can, um, pay for the whatever the material is, say the gate opener, and then have that individual, the client, just order it themselves with, whatever that payment amount is, and then do the install themselves. Where it gets tricky is if you guys have to justify, like if it has to be, a lot of them are solar powered, so they're just connecting, a wire to a battery, and it gets a lot more complicated if it has to be done electrical, because then you have to run electrical, and I know y'all have to justify that the electrical is run safely. So it does get tricky, but we do try to kind of work with everyone, the client and VR, to try to find somebody that can do those installs and the vendors. But it yes, it's always a little bit tricky.
Thank you for that.
Thank you. Did anyone else have any questions or feedback or? And Lynn, if you want to reach out to me too through email, I can see we can kind of try to chase down some more options for you too. I know we had discussed it before, but um, if you want to just shoot me an email, we can try to make sure we get something figured out.
Okay, I'll do that because I might have a few more questions about
Sure,
those specific gate openers.
that sounds good. And then if y'all are interested, our forms and everything can be found on our website. And it's just, if you just Google Texas Agribility, it will take you to it, but it's txagribility.tamu.edu. Like I said, I'm not the only one here on staff. We have several other our disability specialists and other occupational therapists and project directors and coordinators that kind of help us here on our team. Um, and then I'm going to leave my contact information up. We do have like a general email, but I can also, I'll put my personal, just direct email in the chat if you have any questions, especially about, vendors or how to, say you have somebody in mind and you don't want to know what the process is for getting a farm ranch assessment or business planning assistance or something like that. Feel free to just shoot us an email. So put that in the chat, and then after the webinar today, I'll also try to send just an email recap with some of the things we discussed along with that survey. But if you have any questions or ever come across this in the future, working with individuals or farmers and ranchers, even if you're not sure if we can help, we can always kind of discuss that and see what the best route to take is. So I've left my email there for you guys. If y'all have any questions, I can hang out for a few more minutes. But thank you all for joining us today. And I also have the webinar recorded if you would like to share this with anyone, within your system and think that might be helpful. So I appreciate you guys. If you have any questions, I'll be on. Thank you all.
Okay, Mackenzie, I'm going to ask you just a real quick question about
Sure.
these gate openers.
Let me stop recording really quickly. Just
Okay.
get that.